Hey everyone, welcome to the Occult Rejects. And as you can see in the title of this episode, me, Mario, and Megan are back with another episode for the Tarot series, the Major Arcana. This, I think, is part 5, which I'm thinking will probably end up being 7, maybe, to finish off the whole series. So we're like in the home stretch at this point. I know it's been a long one, and I appreciate all the people that have commented on it, jumped in on the lives, checked it out, and have listened to it since part 1 that have contacted me. I've gotten a lot of great feedback for both of yous, and I think it's a great series, and I had a lot of fun myself just learning from both of you. So yeah, just I guess we'll just get going. Real quick, I do also want to let everybody know who both of you are in case they're jumping in on part 5 and don't know who either one of you are. We'll start off with you, Megan, and Megan, let everybody know where they can find your stuff and what's up with you.
Yeah, hi everybody. So I'm a practicing occultist. I'm also an intuitive tarot reader, and my main page is Instagram. So it's the number 7 degrees of wisdom, no 01 or dashes or anything at the end. I also have a Facebook page. It's Megan Allen, and then 7 degrees of wisdom in parentheses. If you guys want to book any of my services, I also do spiritual consultations, paranormal consultations, all that kind of stuff. So if you're interested in any of my services, just hit me up.
Awesome, very nice. Yes, and I have mentioned before in the past, and I do just wanted to say this right now. I have said in the past before that I don't I question getting your tarot cards read by somebody else, and that is because I think just a lot of people either aren't understanding of them, or it's just more of a money thing. But I was very happy to know that Megan told me that she has had a few people hit her up for services, and I wouldn't have them on if I wouldn't suggest them to do that stuff. I know I have said again before in the past, I'm very questionable with people reading their cards. I think they should learn the cards themselves, but these two people do look at them completely differently, and I do promote their services actually. So like I know I've said it in the past, but with these two people it's different. I do think that they look at it differently, and you're going to get an experience with your tarot cards and with the way they present it than you would get from 90% other people. That's just my opinion. So I just want to say I'm happy
Thank
that
you, Nick.
people have hit you up, and I know you guys are promoting your services, and I just want to say like I stand behind that as well. I think
Thank you, Nick.
having you two, either one of yous, you're gonna get a good read, an educational one. I think so.
That's right. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. For sure. No, thanks for saying that. And that's what I try and do with my tarot readings. It's almost kind of like a little lesson built in with each card because I'm trying to educate as much as possible so that people can read their own cards. But I do understand the people who want to have an outside perspective.
Mhm.
That can be very, very helpful. And I've heard from a number of people too that they find it difficult to read for themselves. And so I think that's understandable as
Okay.
well for a few
Yeah.
different reasons.
Yeah.
But my name is Mario, and my project is called Symbolic Studies. And essentially, you can find everything that I do at symbolicstudies.com. And so I encourage people to check out my YouTube channel, my Instagram. I have a Patreon. I have other services too, and things like that. But symbolicstudies.com is my main hub.
Yeah, definitely go check out the stuff that he's been doing with this girl. So
Oh, thanks, man.
yeah. You want to plug that real quick? I mean, you are on there as well. So
Yeah, for
sometimes.
sure. So my girlfriend has a channel, and it's called The Healing Home. Well, actually, the full channel is called Michelle's Healing Home. She has a podcast called The Healing Home, and then we have a show together called Last Thursday. So every Thursday we go live, and we talk about a lot of fringe stuff, kind of alternative information. We kind of go there with some topics that I think a lot of people in this community are already familiar with, MK Ultra type stuff, psyopy things, things of that nature. Right now, we're doing a series called the Summer of Love series, and so we're talking about the '60s, and so we're talking
Yes.
about the culture creation aspect of the '60s. We're talking about acid and the Hell's Angels. Michelle knows a lot about Charles Manson and all of that stuff, and so we've
Oh,
been
that
getting
stuff is
into.
just so interesting.
Yeah, definitely. So people might like that. So last Thursday at Michelle's Healing Home.
Awesome. Yeah, and especially I had a couple of people recently hit me up and even tell me, again, I don't know exactly what it is, and after maybe another few days when this apartment is all set up, I can start listening to stuff again. But
Sure.
I even had people hitting me up telling me that stuff that I was talking about Rex Heuermann like almost matches stuff that you were talking about with Manson. And I was like, yo, I got to figure out what this connection is. But I have had listeners of mine actually telling me some of the stuff you've been doing on that other channel and saying it's, great stuff. So
Right on. Very
definitely
cool.
go check that out. Yeah, I thought that was cool. I was like, oh, nice, man. I was like, that's great. So yeah, the links for all of your stuff and all of Megan's stuff will be in the bottom too. We'll include everything that they're willing to send me and share. I think I have everything anyway, already saved on a copy and paste. So go check out all their links and everything that they got down there. And I guess we'll get into it now. We're going to start off with the death card that is from the Toth deck, and Mario will kick it off like he's done in the last 4. Here we go, sir.
Cool. There it is. Right on. Awesome. So yeah, the 13th card of the Major Arcana. This is Death. And it's interesting. The first thing that I have to mention right off the bat is it used to be a tradition to have this card be unnamed. And so sometimes it was referred to as the card with no name. And so I have a lot of older decks, and I have a number of decks that do not actually have a name for Death. And this is kind of symbolic of some scorpionic symbolism as well, because it correlates with Scorpio. And so the idea was there's a number of cultures that believe that if you mentioned Death by name, you would actually be invoking him. And so they thought it was best just to kind of keep his name out of it, right? But here, obviously, you can see it is labeled Death. It's really interesting, too, that eat is right in the middle of death. So if we're just looking at kind of wordplay and etymology and things like that. And isn't that the nature of eating? Generally something has to be sacrificed. Something has to die, right? And so something living is going to be consumed. And so I think it's really interesting that eat is right in the middle of death, but this card has a lot to do with transformation. In fact, the alternative hermetic title for the card is Child of the Great Transformers as well, right? So this is all about cycles. This is the end of a cycle, but the beginning of another one. So death really is just a symbolic birth. And birth is a symbolic death as well, right? So just like any cycle, it's going to loop, and it's going to basically start over again. And so life basically cannot exist without death. And the next few cards, actually, that we're going to be talking about, there's a lot of alchemical symbolism baked into the next few cards that we're going to be discussing today. I like the fact that Crowley put death at the bottom of the ocean. That's very, very interesting. As I already mentioned, it correlates with Scorpio, which is a water sign. And in my opinion, it seems as though we come from the waters and return to the waters, right? Whether it's the waters above or the waters below. If you look at the cosmos or the universe at large, there's been a lot of symbolism that relates it to an ocean, if you will. And there's lots of oceanic symbolism with birth. And so just think of the amniotic sac and amniotic fluids, and then the water breaking when you're born, and all that kind of stuff. It goes on and on and on. Our relationship with water really, it just kind of can't be overemphasized because it is that important. We're mostly water. This planet's mostly water, et cetera, et cetera. So death is at the bottom of the ocean, which I think is very appropriate, given the generative qualities of water. But then also, too, there's this idea that, the bottom of the ocean, and we'll get into this actually with the devil card, but the bottom of the ocean has deities that are associated with it that are maybe looked at as being kind of malefic or kind of dark or evil or whatever. And I actually think the bottom of the ocean, or ocean gods and goddesses and stuff, I think those were some of the first adversarial deities that were out there. And there is this old concept that hell actually used to exist underwater, not necessarily underground, which I think is really, really intriguing. Right. So notice that there's actually water gods that have tridents, right? And the devil holds a trident. And so, like I said, we'll be getting into that, I think, a little bit more in the devil card. But here you see death with a scythe, right, which is intended to be used for harvest. Generally, people think of wheat, right, when you're thinking of that scythe. A lot of times in newer decks, you will see Death riding a horse. Generally, it's a white horse. It's more traditional to have him with a scythe. There are some decks that actually have Death holding a bow with some arrows, which I think is really interesting too. Especially kind of given the fact that Scorpio is right next to Sagittarius, right? The archer. And sometimes the archer's arrow, it's literally pointing at the stinger of the scorpion. And so there's actually a very curious, interesting esoteric relationship between the arrow of Sagittarius, which is going to be the next card, the art card, and the stinger of the scorpion. So when I see this scythe, when I see this blade, I definitely think of the stinger of the scorpion. Bless you. And it's interesting too, because when I've done some of my Scorpio research, I learned that scorpions can actually commit suicide, and so they can sting themselves to death. And so there's even videos online where you can see this happen. And so to me, this is just an interesting phenomenon, because I'm not aware of too many animals that have this ability to commit suicide. But if they're backed into a corner, or they feel as though they can't get out of a situation, like if they're kind of like, if they're caged, essentially, they can commit suicide, which is really, really interesting for a few different reasons. So their poison can be turned against themselves, right? And so this transmutation or transformation, they can basically kind of like induce on other people, but they can also do that to themselves, or they can put that on other creatures. They can kill other creatures and whatever, but they can also turn and kill themselves. So Death being at the bottom of the ocean, you could see him. He's kind of moving around his scythe, and he's creating these bubbles, kind of like these bubbles of life. It almost seems as though he's creating souls. And notice that there's kind of like this line coming from his groin area. And to me, this is symbolic of, the fact that life obviously comes through sex. And Scorpio corresponds with the genitals, right? So each astrological sign has a correspondence with the human body. Scorpio corresponds with the genitals. So there's a lot of sexual connotations that kind of come with that and everything else. So I'm not surprised that this idea of souls being created and maybe starting their new journey or their next chapter is coming from that region of his body. A few interesting details that they decided to include in the card is you actually see the different expressions of Scorpio. So this is a tradition that there's 3 different aspects of Scorpio. There's the scorpion, the serpent, and then the phoenix or eagle. And they're all depicted here. You see the scorpion down below, you see the serpent on the left-hand side, and then you also see what looks like an eagle or a phoenix up top. And I think the phoenix, too, is kind of an appropriate symbol for death, kind of given the death/renewal aspect of everything. You also see the fish right there, too, on the left-hand side of the card, which is also interesting because the Hebrew letter that's associated with this card is Nun, N-U-N, which means fish. And so all of these creatures that are depicted here, they're all here for a very, very good reason. I know, too, it's really interesting. It kind of bothered me for a little while before I had read anything about it. But his arms, it's almost like the way he's holding the scythe and the arms, it looks very awkward. It looks uncomfortable. Unnatural. It's completely unnatural, right? And so this is done intentionally. This is done by design. And off the top of my head, I actually, I don't know the reference that I came across that speaks to this, but, Lady Frida Harris, right, and Crowley, they knew what they were doing. And so this is definitely by design, so maybe you guys have some thoughts on that. But it's kind of backwards. It's kind of off.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't look right, for sure. It almost gives you almost like an animal, in a sense, like hind leg look. Or like, I don't know. It's just very weird.
Right. Definitely. So Scorpio too. I'm just going over my notes here. Scorpio generally, from an alchemical standpoint, is associated with putrefaction or negretto or the blackening, and so it's putting something through the process of it. Basically, my understanding is being burned essentially, and so this makes a lot of sense with Scorpio and death. There's definitely this decaying sort of quality, almost like a disintegrating sort of quality, this breaking down essentially quality that has to do with the card. And then
I almost think of like a like almost like burnt to ash.
yeah,
Like when you see like a log that is like totally black because it's just been burnt in it.
yeah. That's totally appropriate for sure. And then I have some other thoughts when it comes to the more traditional sort of layout, like we'll see here in the Rider Waite. But regarding the Crowley version, I think that's most everything I wanted to mention. What about you guys? You guys have any additional thoughts about this card?
Well, I like the Scorpio part. I mean, that again, like you were saying, with the Scorpion, that makes me think of like Scorpio and Apophis, the Destroyer, in the Lesser Hexagram ritual, the hexagram ritual. And like I do see that like kind of as associated with death anyway, like the death and rebirth, like that part of magic. So I mean, it makes perfect sense to me. And when you mentioned before about like I didn't even know that about a Scorpion actually, that it could kill itself.
Yeah.
So I mean, I could see like if technically if people think that like if you're doing magic and there is a death and rebirth, I could see as you playing off as like killing yourself.
Yeah.
So I could see the Scorpion actually being used for that, maybe for even that reason.
Yeah. The other thing that's coming to mind too, just regarding Scorpio season, is that a lot of events or holidays that people kind of associate with this thinning of the veil happens during Scorpio season. So how appropriate is it that Halloween happens during Scorpio season? And also the Day of the Dead as well. And so people have looked at both of those traditions and have basically considered them opportune times to communicate with the other side. Especially Day of the Dead, where it was like an actual, like it's like an active thing that you're trying to communicate with your ancestors and you're leaving them offerings on an altar or on their grave or something along those lines. Obviously, we kind of have stuff like that with Halloween as well. So Scorpio season definitely is associated with that time of year where you can actually make contact with spirits and things like that.
That's interesting.
With the dead.
Wow, thanks, man. I didn't realize that either, or never thought of it.
Right.
Besides the Scorpion, I just, then I'll let you go, Megan. I mean, I do find, like, again, just even the swirls, I mean, they almost kind of look like spirals again.
Sure.
I mean, even looking at it from an artistic view, and I guess just thinking what the shape could look like, I mean, it almost even looks like the sit that he's holding, and then those other things coming out. To me, that would almost look like a boat, believe it or not, like with the staffs and everything. Like, so like I see like that maybe even going back to like kind of like watery symbolism, even though it's not really showing the boat, and it's I forgot what you call that part of the boat. Where you have all the things on there to make it go. Wow, I'm having like a total brain fart. I can't remember the name of that. But it just looks like that to me. And then like you get the fish. Like I could see a lot of like more water aspects to it. But I do find the swirls interesting because like, and then I'll make this quick. Even in the eyeball series that I did, I had thought that the Sith could have also been the cornea, and the cornea does have those swirls in them as well. So I'm even wondering, is that like kind of representing the same thing?
Right. The other thing I'll say is that there's been a long history associating humanity with fish. And so this is like a thing where either humanity has been looked at as fish, followers of Christ, as an example, have been looked at as fish. There's many fish parables in the Bible. The last sign of the zodiac is Pisces, right? And so isn't it interesting that the last sign, the 12th sign, that kind of encompasses the whole entire zodiac in a lot of ways, is two fish or fishes. And so we really do, we're bonded with water symbolism, I think perhaps more than any of the other elements. And we are absolutely bonded, I think, with fish and aquatic symbolism and oceanic symbolism in so many different ways. It truly goes on and on and on and on. So I think that's part of the implication here, is that we're kind of fish people in a way, or even to our a lot of sages and wise men have been associated with fish as well. You know, these deities. Oftentimes they're actually grouped in 7. In the Vedic world, the rishis come from the northern sky, and they have fish symbolism attached to them, or the Apkallu from the Sumerian side of things. They're also associated with fish. And so there's this idea that these fish gods either came from the ocean or came from the north and bestowed wisdom upon humanity. And so this idea of our elders, or these ancient ones, being related to fish, giving us information, how to write, and things like that, really important stuff. They've also been associated with fish. So the fish water sort of metaphor that's being put out here, you can pull at that thread all day long.
That's a really good point. I mean, you can go all the way back to like Sumerian and Babylonian stuff, and they had
Exactly.
Part fish, looking
Yep.
like they're enlightening humans or whatever they're doing, something.
Indeed. Yeah, exactly.
Nice, thank you.
So for me, like right off the bat, I like Nick thought like it totally looks like a ship mast. I think it's called a mast.
Yeah.
And so that's initially what I thought of. And then so there's also some geometric shaping going on here. I've said this before in the past episodes, that I love he's using the sacred geometry, geometric shapes, right? So what you notice here, like the mast, it's kind of like a twisted DNA helix to me, it looks like. And then what would be the mast of the ship with the spears, it reminds me, traveling up the tree of life from Malkut to Kether. And as you can see, like on the top, it kind of fades out and you can't see the end of it. It's because he's so far down. He's got a lot of work to do, a lot of transformation, a lot of rebirth to get to the top of that tree.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Yeah, and there's actually there's a ship with a large mast in the constellations via Argo, and Argo is positioned right along the Milky Way galaxy, which has been called the river of heaven, the river in the night sky, basically. And so I could totally see what you guys are saying with that. Sometimes Argo is actually I believe Monoceros, the unicorn constellation, and Argo are sometimes flipped. Sometimes it's the unicorn, and sometimes it's actually the ship, from what I can recall with my research and everything else. The other thing I'll say, too, that's really, really interesting, and this gets into Saturnian symbolism, and that's very appropriate given the fact that he's holding this scythe, is that at the bottom of the ocean, there's so much pressure. Right. It's interesting that we had this whole entire submarine storyline not too long ago. Right. And this pressure that can basically, crush a submarine or anything that goes down there. And so that's something to kind of take into account that I've thought about, too, is that there's an immense amount of pressure down there. And Saturn is all about restrictions, boundaries, and things like that. So I would say Saturn is definitely, there's this heavy nature. It corresponds, right, with lead and the color black. And you see here, death is obviously black. And so Saturn would be that pressure, and then Jupiter would be that expansive nature, would be the exact opposite sort of energy, in my opinion. So there's a few Saturnian things going on here, which fits in line with an older Babylonian belief, too, that we come through the gateway of man, which is Cancer, and we exit through the gateway of the gods, which is Capricorn, right? And we'll be talking about Capricorn here with the Devil card. And so Saturn has always been associated with this like finality. It's like the end of the line before a new beginning, because under the traditional system, Saturn was the furthest planet out, right? So it takes 27 years or whatever to make one full revolution versus Mercury, which takes like 88 days. So it's a big, slow, lumbering planet, and it's related to partitions and this pressure sort of thing, I would say. Also, real quick, too, just regarding skeleton symbolism, because it's a thing that we could get into. It's the last physical component of us that perishes or disintegrates, right? So it's the last thing that is going to be seen or that's going to remain physically here on this earth. And it can take many years for depending on the situation, depending on where your bones are at and all that kind of stuff. It can take a really long time for bones to actually completely disintegrate. And so it's kind of amazing that it's the last physical aspect of us that will be here on earth after we die.
Do you think it's black because it's like showing it's charred too? Or?
To me, I kind of look at it like I was saying with the putrefaction or the negretto, the blackening sort of thing. It reminds me a lot of that. And so I think that that's maybe what he was trying to encode. And obviously, generally, bones are white, right? So there's this little bit of inversion there.
For sure.
But yeah, that's a good question.
Very good. You guys have anything else, or you want me to go on to the next one?
Yeah, feel free.
All right. Here we go. This is, by the way, just, let people know. I tried to grab the best cards I could online. Sometimes some of them have different hues on them and they're not correct. So bear with me if the colors may not be matched perfectly.
Oh, you're solid, dude.
All right.
You're good. Mauro, you want to go first on this one or do you want me to?
Feel free.
Okay, guys, so the death card is my number one favorite card. I'm a Scorpio, so it is my personal card. Anyway, I just kind of wanted to put that out there. So I understand this card on a deep level. So the secret name, as Mario mentioned before, he mentioned the first part, but there's a second part that goes with it. So its secret name is the Child of the Great Transformers and the Lord of the Gates of Death. So that's the secret occult name. It is also the 13th card. So that also, is synonymous with superstition. But actually, 13 is a really good number. In numerology, 1 + 3 is 4, which is foundations, right? So it's foundations to grow from. It's ruled by Scorpio, which is a fixed water sign. It's also known as the key of deliverance. So in the occult world, we call the major arcana keys. So they are the keys to the paths on the tree of life to reach transcendence. So that's why they are called called keys, and you'll hear me refer to them as keys. So keywords here for this card is transformation, transition, the death of self, capital S. It's the great initiator. It's twice born within this lifetime. So it's like if you die before you die, you don't have to die when you die. So that's a common saying in the occult world as well, which means, if you transform and die here while you're living, you won't have to die when you actually die. So that's a really synonymous quote. And then we have the number 13. So there is also 13 lunar months within a year. So there's a connection there with 13. And I kind of associate the death card with the moon card as well. So that makes a lot of sense to me. So he has a banner here. And for those of you in the occult world, this rose is used by the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And it has a specific meaning. And it represents divinity and enlightenment. And the banner is black and white. So the color gray is known as the color of wisdom. If you're an adept, you have your wand. One end's white, one is black, and then gray in the middle. Unity of duality. And so that's why the banner is black and white, because it hasn't unified yet. And then you have the rose, which is divinity and enlightenment. And as Mario said before, the skeleton represents the true self. It's the essential part of you that is beyond your personality and body, and it's eternal, and it always remains. That's when everything that dies, the only thing that remains is their bones. So it's kind of a representation of, when you die, your spirit doesn't die. Your body dies, but your spirit is eternal. So the rose it also represents the fifth element, the quintessence or the spirit of life. And then if you notice in the full card, he's got a white rose in his left hand, which represents the super consciousness or illumination. So we have the rose again carried over from the full. He's at this stage of transformation, death, and rebirth. And there's the white rose again. So there is a sun in the background there with the towers. And also you have tower symbolism again in quite a few of these cards. If you guys are interested, and I went down a rabbit hole of pillars with all the tarot card decks that I had. And there is something there. There's a lot of connections to pillar and tower symbolism as well. So the sun represents rebirth day by day. Like every day it sets and then it comes back. And there's also a river in the background. And the river represents the stream of consciousness, or it can also be seen as the river of life. And then you have the boat there in the back. And that's like the path on the water going towards the sun, going towards the light, or back to source. So that's what that represents. This card is also a message of surrendering to the process of transformation. And it's a card of letting go, because we all have to let go to transform and change ourselves in the way that we need to become more enlightened. It's just an essential part of life, the path of life. Nobody is immune from death. Death comes from us, for us all. And then Mario also mentioned the 3 symbols. I have those written down too. So there's Scorpios associated with 3 symbols: the scorpion, the eagle or phoenix, and also sometimes a snake. So basically, transcendence, liberation, and acceptance is the main theme of this card. So that's all I've got for that one.
Thank you very much.
Very cool. Yeah. A few additional thoughts about this card. So focusing on Death himself, and then also his horse. So notice that he's wearing armor here. I think this is very much a nod towards Scorpio, and the fact that you just look at a scorpion and they are built for battle. They wear armor. They're always ready to go. They're always ready to fight, sort of thing. And so I think when I see the scorpion, I do think of their exoskeleton. And so when I see Death wearing armor, I think that there's probably a relationship that's being correlated here. And then also too, regarding the horse, as I've said before, fits in line with a lot of symbols that I just refer to generally or generically as just like travel symbols or journey symbols. So whether you're talking about the horse, the boat, the locomotive, the chariot, the wagon, generally, I think these all fit within the same umbrella. And the journey that's implied is not only the journey of life, right, that we're all on right now, but the journey to the afterlife or the journey to the underworld. And so Death is actually a psychopomp. And so is Mercury, and so are a lot of other figures, right? But he's actually your guide, right? And so he's going to take you to the other side. That's what he's there for. He's there to pick you up and take you to the underworld, or the great beyond, if you want to refer to it that way. And the horse has been associated with this for a very, very long time as well. And so to me, it would make sense that there is a travel or journey symbol here in the Death card, right? So that's the thing. They say that Death comes on a white horse. So there's all of that. And then I also wanted to mention the fact that the tower symbols, or the tower symbolism, as you mentioned, the individual tower in and of itself, it's symbolic of humanity, as are a lot of symbols or a lot of structures that are kind of built the same way. I think the pyramid is very similar. I think the standing stone is similar. I think the obelisk is similar. The mountain itself is similar as well. But when humans try and recreate these things or create these things that stretch towards the heavens, they're trying to create a bridge between Earth and the heavens, just like the Tower of Babel story, right? And so tree symbolism is very similar as well. And so the individual tower or pillar represents that. And then when you have 2 of them, there's always this middle way. There's always this this gateway or this point of transcendence this third pillar or this middle way, this middle path. And so I think that that's kind of what's being implied here, is this gateway, perhaps to the other side, or this gateway towards new beginnings, if you want to put it that way. So I wanted to mention that. And then also, this is more of an esoteric thing, but it's very, very fascinating, and I think it's worth bringing up. But when you look at a lot of older tarot decks and you're looking at the death card, you'll notice that what you see on the ground is you'll see severed heads, you'll see crowns, you'll see grails, you'll see jewelry, you'll see things like that. Oftentimes you see the severed head of a king who's wearing a crown. And so there's always objects or items alluding to wealth. And you can kind of see it here, right? It's kind of smaller or whatever, but you see what looks like a king, and he's on his back and he's dead, and then you see his crown right next to him. So this is a tradition that's been associated with this card for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so when you look at the earliest death cards, like in particular, I'm thinking of the Solabusca, which I don't know if either of you guys have looked at the Solabusca that much, but it's a really, really interesting deck, right? And so in the Solabusca, the card that corresponds with death, there's a huge severed head, like way bigger than I've ever seen before. And I'm like, why is this head in particular so large? And it looks like it's actually the head of a giant. And this was what I focused on in one of my first videos ever that I ever put online. And what I think it's speaking to is the fact that Orion, the great hunter, is actually opposite of Scorpio in the heavens. It's really close to Taurus. And so Scorpio and Taurus are opposites on the ecliptic. So when the Scorpion rises, Taurus is falling. Also, when the Scorpion rises, Orion, the great hunter, is also falling. And there's mythology about Orion, if I'm not mistaken, being stung by a scorpion as well. So there's astrotheological stuff going on here with Scorpio and some of the older death cards that depict these severed heads and everything else. So just wanted to put that out there. If you're a tarot nerd, you should look into the Solabusca and look at the Major Arcana. There's all sorts of juicy secrets in there.
Yeah, so the Solabusca deck inspired Pamela Coleman Smith to do the Rider-Waite. So that was the style that she chose, just for all you tarot nerds out there too. That's where she got her inspiration.
Exactly. There's some cards in the Solabusca, which is like the 15th century, like the Three of Swords. It's an exact match. The Three of Swords from the Solabusca, and then also from the Rider-Waite. So yeah, you're exactly right.
Very nice. You did mention something earlier, Megan, about saying that something about the moon being associated with this, right?
Yes.
Now, like it's with the deck that I use, the Magical Golden Dawn. The moon card actually has almost the exact same pillars like that on it for the moon card. So, as soon as you said that and I saw that, I was like, wow. I was like, even though it has the sun in the background, it still had those pillars on it, and it has like a water stream coming down the middle of it. Dog and the wolf, and then whatever, a lobster or whatever that is.
Yeah, just like it's like an intuitive feeling that I get when I look at it. I can't explain it. I just want to associate it with the energy of the moon.
Yeah, well, I mean, somebody was even saying in the chat before, mentioning a lot of Saturn before on the other card, and kind of a lot of Saturnian type stuff, and then we have the sun there. Is that even showing the son of Saturn, something to that effect, involving death? Saturn would, be involved with death as well. Something that I just picked up on it, and I was just wondering, and it was because of that person's comment about the son of Saturn. Sometimes you have to, for me, I just question, SON and SUN. What are we really actually saying?
Exactly.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, even as silly as it sounds, just from experiences that I've had, and when I've made comments about the black sun, and I associate that with Saturn, it almost looks like an eclipse. In order for that to happen, you have to get the moon and the sun to actually, come in together. And you do see even the black being handed off or whatever that thing's taking. You almost see kind of that relationship of them meeting each other, the black of whatever and the sun or the light, which would form the eclipse that I've said I see in my mind's eye.
Yeah.
So, like, could it really be that deep? I don't know, but it made me think of that because of that person's comment.
Sure.
Yeah. Agreed.
Real quick, a couple things I'll just add. The moon is absolutely appropriate. There's so much lunar symbolism with humans, and the fact that we're constantly going through changes, just like the moon itself. You know, it's always morphing and evolving, waxing and waning, et cetera, et cetera. And so, even man, my understanding is that, and I've said this before many times, but that men, these words come from moon. So you can switch out the vowel. Just like month, right, or Monday, right? You can switch out that middle vowel. You'll get man, men, min, etc., like minute. And so we have a lot of correspondences with the moon. So I think that is appropriate for a bunch of different reasons. Also, too, regarding the white rose, a lot of roses have a 5-petaled nature to them, a 5-petaled pattern, right? And here you can see that it's a 5-petaled rose, which a lot of people would refer to this as the Tudor rose, basically. And when you're looking at the 5-petaled rose, you should think about Venus and Venus's pattern that it makes in the sky over the course of 8 years. From the perspective of Earth, it's called the Venus rose, or the kiss of Venus, or the Venus pentagram or pentacle. And so the number 5, though, in and of itself, the mathematics of the 5-pointed star, it really is a transcendental number. So it's the number that exists between the physical, material world and the spiritual world, I would say, which is why there's so many mysterious, amazing things about it, which is why the 5th element is spirit or ether and things like that. And so when I see the number 5 or the 5-pointed star or 5-petaled rose, I always think about that. And even the Egyptians, their symbol for the duat, which is their version of the underworld, is a 5-pointed star. And so that was picked, very strategically for some of the reasons that I'm saying. So there's a lot of 5 symbolism, pentagonal symbolism that you can kind of, pull out if you wanted to with that flag there.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Like, I think even like Kabbalistically, I think, reading certain people's books, and they always just seem to include it. So I'm going by like this is just a common thing. I think like a 5-petal rose with like, with a beautiful woman or a supposed like good-looking woman would go along as like a symbolism for like Venus even.
Sure.
Or Netzach, really, on the tree of life. And like that does have a relationship with Gabor. Like even when, like I've mentioned it before, you get these flashing colors, it's because these spheres do kind of have a relationship. Venus would have a little bit of red, or Netzach would have a little bit of red from Gabor, and a talisman that is a little bit of Mars, in my opinion, that could also, be causing death in a sense, chaotic or warlike energies.
Oh yeah, well the traditional correspondence for Scorpio is Mars,
Yeah.
the ruling planet.
Yeah.
So there you go.
I could see like a relationship here, even bringing in Venus, which in tarot Venus does have a relationship with Saturn. So like again, like is that all like who knows?
It goes on and on and on.
Yes, yeah. All right, you guys done with this one, and then we'll move on to the next.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
Sounds good. Here we go. Again, sorry for the quality.
Oh, you're good. You're good. So this is the art card, the 14th card of the Major Arcana. In most other decks, it's referred to as Temperance. And so just off the bat, I have to say that, once again, there's lots of alchemical things that can kind of be deduced here and talked about. And so I think that this card really has a lot to say about the optimism of death, actually. And so Crowley has said that, the first step in the creative process is destruction. That if you're going to cook a meal, if you're going to build a house, if you're going to create anything, chances are you're going to need raw materials, or chances are something might have to die or be cut down or harvested or something like that, just like we saw in the previous card. So to me, this is kind of like the next step of like, hey, these things that kind of are no longer, or the things that we have harvested, now we can actually put them together and create something, generate something, manifest, right? And so here you see a woman and she's creating. one woman split in two, right? So there's two sides to her, right? So you see that one side of her face, or she has two faces, but one side is blue, the other's white. One arm is blue, the other is white. And she's actually split right down the middle. It might be kind of hard for people to see, but there's actually an arrow shooting upward from the cauldron. And it kind of is, it's right in front of what looks like this rainbow sort of streak that wraps around her and her shoulders. So that's definitely nodding towards its planetary and astrological correspondence, which is Sagittarius, which is ruled by Jupiter. And so Sagittarius is the archer. And so here you have that arrow going upward from that cauldron. And actually, Crowley also said that the arrow itself, the glyph of the arrow, is something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing, I'm using my own words, but it's the simplest glyph that you can create for Mercury, and that it's actually very much created to Mercury. And I think that makes a ton of sense, because for the last handful of years, I found so many different things that relate Mercury with the phallus. And so it relating to the arrow, I think, to me, makes a lot of sense. The fact that Mercury, too, is a messenger of the gods. He travels. He's a psychopomp. He goes to and fro. The arrow is also a traveler, right? And so it needs to move in order to be fully expressed, I guess you can say. So I think this card has a lot to do with creation, with alchemy. As I said, the other name is temperance. And so I think of when things are tempered, right, which is like a process in forging as well. So I think of, I even think of temper too, and like temperature and things like that. So I think of heat and I think of warmth. And here you have a fire down below with that cauldron. And that cauldron is really like an alchemical vessel, right, for creation and transmutation and all these other things. And I know actually the two figures to the left and to the right, the white lion and the red eagle, it's speaking to some more esoteric alchemical sort of processes and things like that, which off the top of my head, I can't even remember. I know one of them, I believe it's something like white gluten and red something or other. But Crowley also talked about that in his Book of Thoth. So going back to Mercury real quick, Mercury is known as being a divine androgyne. So he is both feminine and masculine. So he is able to operate on this spectrum between positive and negative, black and white, feminine, masculine, etc. This is what allows him, I think, to travel from the above to the below, to these different sorts of places. This is why Mercury corresponds with the magician card as well. I think if you're going to be a good little magician or wizard or witch or something like that, you don't want to be stuck in just the feminine or just the masculine or just the black or just the white. You want to be able to see the whole entire spectrum. And that's actually a more holistic sort of approach. And so here, this woman, I think, very much correlates to like a feminine version of Hermes Mercury. The fact that she's split in two. So maybe she can see both the past and the future. She can see the negative and the positive things. She's kind of, I think she's whole in both sides of herself, left brain and right brain, if you want to look at it that way. So she's online, I think, as a complete unit, because she is able to see the full spectrum of things, the polarity of things, right? But I'll say that the one thing that I geek out with the absolute most with this card has to do with the writing that encompasses her behind her.
I was going to say, what does that say? I see one word, which is rectify.
Right. So it's in Latin, and it's 7 words. And I'm actually not going to say the full thing, but the first letter, it's like, off the top of my head, it's like visita interiora, something. But basically, every single word begins with a letter, and when you take the acronym of the first letters of every word, it stands for vitriol. And the translation for this phrase is essentially, visit the interior parts of the earth, and thou shalt find the hidden stone. And so this whole entire thing is basically speaking towards my personal opinion. The way I would put it would be it's speaking to this idea of a philosopher's stone.
That's what I was gonna say. Yep.
This philosopher's stone that I think has been put out there through allegory as existing in the middle of the earth, and therefore I would say in the middle of yourself. And so everything about this phrase has to do also with the number 7. And there's a belief that there are 7. There's various schools of thought with alchemy, but there's one version of alchemy. It's called Azoth alchemy, where they basically put a lot of stock into 7 main steps to the alchemical process. So every word corresponds with one of these steps. And to me, this symbolizes the fact that if you want to get to your core self, your most authentic self, your sacred center, that metaphorically there's 7 steps, towards this place, essentially. And so you'll notice too, this is like an old tradition: 7 veils, 7 steps, 7 spheres. I created a presentation called 7 Gates to the Great Beyond. I'm pretty sure I get into some of the symbolism, but it's really speaking to all of that. These 7 steps towards transmutation, towards your sacred center. And so once again, visit the interior parts of the earth, and thou shalt find the hidden stone. Visit the inner part of yourself, locate your sacred center, and you'll find your own personal philosopher's stone. That's kind of how I interpret it personally.
Yeah. Yep. And that's why my name is 7 Degrees of Wisdom.
Totally. Exactly. I thought of you when I was writing down my notes for this card.
That's great. That's great.
Yep.
Go
So sorry.
No.
So for me, I've said before, like, I don't know the Thoth deck very well. I have it, I own it, I've looked through it, but Mario is way more well versed in this deck. But what I know about this card is that it's an alchemy card, and it's like this card is a card of unity. It's very apparent that through transformation, balance, and harmony, that they've become one, and through alchemy, because that's what they're doing there with that cauldron and the fire and mixing things together, and they're going through that alchemical process. And when you do that and complete the chemical process, then you are one. You are unity.
Very well
Right.
said.
And I'll just say too, for people who have been following my work with the northern portion of Earth, the northern sky, and everything else, there's a huge correspondence here where when I say visit the interior parts of the Earth, arguably it's not talking about underground. It's actually talking about the north.
Yes.
The point of origin and return, in my opinion, and
Yes.
the opinion of many other groups as well, for sure.
Good point. That's a really good point.
Yep.
Thank you. I know you mentioned before something about kind of like Mercury and being like, I guess both sides. It's even like that in in the Kabbalah with Hod. If you want to put Mercury there, which most people do, that the symbol for that is a hermaphrodite. So I mean, it is showing both energies mixed together. Some people I know, especially I think Crowley and others, do also attribute him sometimes Thoth, who would go with Mercury, in my opinion as well. They would put him at the moon. So like that's already in between the middle pillar. And if you go from Mercury to the sun, the next, either go up or go across the next sphere over, beauty of balance and all that, that's in the middle again. So like I do think it is trying to tell you something. I think these occult ideas end up getting twisted and represented in society the wrong way, but I think they're actually are trying to tell you something about with magic and extending up the tree, kind of being in between both energies.
That's right. Exactly.
But
For
you
sure.
be in control of them in a sense too.
Yeah. And the hidden Sephiroth, Doth, is on that central point in the tree, right? So the point of transcendence, which Doth is, from everything that I've looked into, heavily corresponds with the north as well. There's a northern correspondence with that hidden Sephiroth. So I think it's really all talking about some of the same stuff. And I agree with you. The lunar symbolism is interesting too, because it makes me think of Artemis, right? And she's the goddess of the hunt. And so, what does she have as a weapon? She has a bow and arrow. And so, it's speaking towards that as well. I think there's some Artemis symbolism being encoded here.
Some Artemis in the art card.
Yeah, exactly. Makes sense, right?
Yeah. One thing I did want to add real quick, and it's just something that I see because of stuff like, besides the eyeball series, I was going to go into stuff with the brain. And my opinion, just from looking at this, the symbol behind her head, and then like that kind of like horned thing in the middle, I don't know what you want to call that, the two crescents, that does actually look like a part of your brain. Believe it or not. I think I've sent it to you in the past, but like I am wondering, is that I have often thought that those crescents, like the Sith, could also be the cornea or something to do with your eyes. I do wonder if that's kind of like showing like a Vesica Pisces, or again, what I was saying before, the two things coming together, becoming one, and like going up into your brain at some point. I know that sounds like really out there, but I do see symbolism of like actually a part of your brain in this card. If you were to think of the Fifth Element, if you were to think of those robots, how they had that head that had that long thing, came out like that, and then the back of them had that big thing like that, that literally does look like a part of your brain, actually. Like I am determined that that costume came out of your brain. And I can see that here in a sense. I can see that same rounding thing, and then the head that would, almost look like Baphomet, in a sense, right there on her chest. I could just looks like the same thing, just artistically to me.
Right. Well, as above, so below, dude. You can go through the whole entire tarot and just find, I think, biological body correspondences and stuff for sure, as you're already doing, kind of in your own way.
Yes. But that's all I got on this. If you want me to go, I'll move on to the next one, Megan.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, and here is it would be Temperance, in the other decks.
Okay, you guys want me to go first?
Sure.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so this card, I call it my alchemy card when it shows up in readings. It's usually indicative that they need to find more of a balance within themselves to kind of move on. So the secret name of this one is the Daughter of the Irreconcilers and the Bringers Forth of Light. That's the secret name for that one. And then it's also associated with the element of fire and Sagittarius. It's the 14th card in numerology. 1 + 4 = 5. 5 represents change in numerology. So this is a changing process, an alchemical process. So some keywords with this one: moderation, renewed sense of purpose, major alchemist, modifying, adaptation, balance, creative transformation, merging of the feminine and the masculine, combining of two metals, balanced. It's an integrated whole, a conjunction of purified essences, since it is an alchemical card. So this card also represents a challenge of states of consciousness and the use of your will as well. So it's like the water and the fire and the Philosopher's Stone thing that we were talking about. It's like the Philosopher's Stone creates like the elixir of life, right? So it kind of brings that whole Philosopher's Stone through alchemy idea together. I think that Michael is associated with this card, and Michael means the likeness of God, shows us the light of our own divinity from within. There is an upward triangle on his chest, which represents the element of fire. Then there's a disc there on his head, which represents the sun. The red wings represent the element of fire, and Michael corresponds to the south. So when you're in magical practice and you're doing your angel invocations, all these, you can find similarities in all the major arcanas when you work with them, when you're practicing high magic, and they also correspond to the angels and then their elemental correspondence and all that stuff too. So that's why this is a perfect card to explain this. That's why when ceremonial magic or high magic, when you're practicing this stuff, all these correspondences and you actually use tarot cards in your practice. It's part of the learning process for meditation and learning all this stuff. That's why it's such an integral part. If you're practicing magic, you have to use tarot, vice versa. So if you're not using them in combination with each other, it will be kind of hard for you to understand the aspect that's needed to further your enlightenment in high magic and kind of move yourself up to the higher ritual states, because you have to understand these archetypes on that level. And so he's got 1 foot in the water and 1 on rock. So that's like having 1 foot in heaven and 1 foot here on earth. So we've got spiritual foundations supporting our physical lives. So that's kind of like the balance there that's in that card. So the path that's, hold on 1 second. I'm trying to.
Oh, I'm just gonna.
Yeah, go ahead, because I'm wrong.
Problem.
I need to find some more notes.
It's all right. I screw up screenshots all the time, so that's I totally get it when I'm covering stuff. One thing I did want to add, just things that I have thought about with tarot cards, especially like ones with, I think, like the star card and this card, or really any of them with water flowing in it. I do think it's quite possible that there's going to be like 2 ways that water is actually going. Like in this card, I could see how, just because of how I guess this world is and just how things work, you're going to automatically think it's flowing down into the bottom of the cup. But I do think if you want to start going up the tree, in my opinion, even part of it I'm going to use as a reference why I think so too. Even with the sun, one of the colors that is associated is like pink salmon. And if you think about pink salmon, or salmon in general, which is normally pink anyway, they do, I think, spawn against, they go against, they don't actually go like all the other fish. They actually spawn and will go against the currents. I think that's the correct terminology or whatever it is. So I could see how like pink salmon being associated with the sun in the middle of the tree. And if you want to start thinking about the moon being in control of the flow and the current here and having some control over you, maybe you have to go against that actually. And now you're going back up the cup if you were technically going back up the tree. Yes. As silly as that sounds, you're going in a different current now. You're going against it. So I have just questioned, like, could that work with cards that show water? Could there be showing you like there could be 2 ways to this current as well?
Yeah. Yeah, I get what you're saying.
All right, so now you can go. Sorry about that. If you found your notes.
No, you're good. You're good.
That, and I did think, how like it looks like, I guess, the sun above the mountains. It does also look like, if you want to look at it artistically, like almost a crown as well.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Some people have put out there a UFO of some sort. I don't know, but
I grew up in there chilling.
I've seen weird stuff in the sky, so I'm sure people have been seeing strange things up there for a really long time. I don't know.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's all like I really wanted to add to this. So if you're done.
I can just finish up real quick.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
So the path that winds behind on this card that goes to what that looks like a sun or a crown, it represents the principle of vibration, the path that leads to the mountain of understanding and wisdom. It suggests the path it is within reach, even though we cannot see it. And then the shining crown represents Kether, the Sephiroth of Kether. Keywords here: beauty, harmony, moderation, higher levels of consciousness, heightened psychic awareness, breakthroughs. It's associated with the 9th house, which is journey and philosophy, and it's ruled by Jupiter. Productivity, endurance, and moderation is what the last notes that I have for those.
Nice. Awesome. A few things I will add here. Let's see where to begin. So regarding the water in the cups, it's actually a tradition to have the cups and the water going through the midsection of this angel, which I think is really interesting. And if I'm not mistaken, off the top of my head, you were referring to this figure as a he, but it's really interchangeable, right? Haven't you noticed that between other tarot decks? So I feel like I have a lot of tarot decks in my mind, and it's generally feminine. And so when I think of the water cutting across her midsection, to me, it's almost like separating the higher and the lower self, or there's some sort of womb sort of thing that I kind of get from it as well. One of the things I've read, and I believe it was by the author Stephen Flowers, he was talking about the symbolism of the water going from cup to cup. And he sees in it, and especially given the angelic sort of nature of this figure too, the kind of alchemical process that is our weather is one of the things that he really talked about. Was almost kind of like you think of rainfall coming down, and obviously it's going to eventually probably find its way back to rivers and things like that, and back to the ocean, only to get evaporated and go back up, to the heavens, if you will, and be stored in these clouds only to come back down. So it's this whole entire recycling sort of cyclical kind of thing with the weather. And so he was waxing poetic about it. So when I look at it, I don't really see that, but I can't not see this card and think of his entry there about weather and weather patterns and stuff like that, and how really it's almost like there's an alchemical lab just above our heads with what's happening with wind and pressure and heat and just everything, you know what I mean? So something to think about. Also, I wanted to mention, I don't know if it's possible for you to zoom into that gown just above the triangle there, but there is a hidden sort of Hebrew thing going on just above the triangle, and it's Yod He Vav He.
Yep.
So from the right to the left, it says Yod He Vav He, the tetragrammaton, the four-letter name of God. Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of a curious, cool little detail that I always like to point out. And then also, too, the flowers down below, and since you're zoomed in, I mean, feel free to keep it zoomed in, but the flowers down below in the lower right-hand side, to me, those look like irises. So those are yellow irises. And the yellow iris is one of the flowers that people have said inspired the fleur-de-lis. And so some people say lilies, some people say irises, some people say bees, but when you look at it here, you can kind of see why the general shape of the iris relates to the fleur-de-lis. And I've done at least 2 or 3 videos on the fleur-de-lis and how I correspond it with Virgo. But if people want to learn a little bit more about the fleur-de-lis and its symbolism, I just did a live presentation all about it, essentially. So there's a lot of generative sort of qualities to the fleur-de-lis. There's actually a northern correspondence to the fleur-de-lis as well. A lot of older compass roses or compasses, the northern mark, the arrow that points north, is actually a fleur-de-lis, where all of the other directions do not have that, which I think is very, very interesting. So just thought I would point that out too.
That's great. The fleur-de-lis, again, like I'm not getting into it too much, but like even in the eyeball series, we did point to how that even you have liquid in your eyes that even moves in that way, depending on which way your pupil's going, or your eye, which would include your iris as well.
Ah, nice.
And not to choose myself or whatever, but and I could see if you even give this idea any credence, I could see how maybe like why even Himmler had a thing with blue eyes. But in my eyeball series, I do try to show, and I even think like in Twin Peaks and other things, even maybe the Ring. I do think like waterfalls or like wells can be like shown as like kind of falling into the iris. The blue eyes, the blue water, the one. If your pupil gets smaller, you'd actually kind of maybe see more of your color, and then when it gets big, it's gone. And like I do think there's things in architecture that I showed where you like a lot of like the springs coming up. I think has to do with like kind of like raising it up, whatever. It's showing, I think, pupil dilation in your eyes.
I see.
Yeah, it's hard to get around.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that just real quick, because I'm finding kind of a correspondence right now, just you talking about this and talking about the iris and everything else. So if I'm not mistaken, there's a Greek goddess named Iris, and I believe she has a relationship to rainbows. And as I mentioned with the Crowley version, there's that rainbow just behind the arrow there, right? There's totally a relationship between the rainbow and Sagittarius and the bow and the arrow. And so obviously the bow itself, it's a bow. We call it a bow, right? And then when you shoot the arrow, it kind of creates this arc as well, right? And even in the Crowley version of, I believe it's the Eight of Wands, Swiftness, there's this rainbow that basically goes over the width of the card, right? And that card corresponds with Sagittarius. So there's actually an esoteric correspondence with Sagittarius and the arrow and the rainbow. You see these connections once you start looking for it.
I'm just gonna say this, and then I'll leave it on the eyeball stuff.
Yeah.
But you're even talking about, like, I totally forgot talking about the Archer and Sagittarius.
Yeah.
Inside now, when you go to see the cones inside your eye, they are almost like, I think Teresa had mentioned it, almost like the shape of a beehive. So, maybe there's symbolism there, but it is kind of like an arch. Inside of your cones, you have something that looks like an arrow.
Ah.
So now if you think of the arrow inside of the cone and just drawing the arch, drawing that, you'll actually see something that could be, again, your cones are associated with color. How you visually see color, you're going to see the shape of the cone and then an arrow.
Right. Nice. Last thing, I have to say this too. This is so fun, guys, by the way. And you guys get me going and thinking and all that kind of stuff. But so Sagittarius, when you see him, he generally has the string pulled and he's about to let go of an arrow, right? If you look into different martial arts that relate to bow shooting, relates to archery, like in Japan, there's this martial art called Kyudo, and it's all about shooting the bow. And there's all of these steps that you have to go through in order to master Kyudo. And I got into it, researching it. I like shooting too, but I got into it and I thought it was really interesting, the different steps. And it's a very Zen-like sort of thing, right? And they're not generally moving, or they're not generally hitting targets that are moving. It's just, one stationary target or whatever. But they say that the hardest part to master is letting go. That is the most difficult aspect of the whole entire art form, is the act of letting go. Getting in position, loading the arrow, all that kind of stuff, all the body movements. They say that people can master that, but the hardest part is actually that final release, basically, which I think symbolically is very, very interesting. And what they say is that if you miss the mark, it's symbolic of an inner imbalance, right? And that if you hit the mark, it means that you are in tune and you are in balance. You're calm, you're at peace, you're content, all of these types of things. So when they miss, they look at it as a reflection of really what's going on in their own psychology, what's going on with them emotionally, spiritually, all of that kind of stuff. And so I can kind of see the relationship with that, and temperance itself, and alchemy and everything else, and with working on yourself, you know what I mean? And your own inner alchemy, and having a relationship with self, and these types of things. So anyways, I just wanted to put that out there because we got on the little arrow tangent.
Oh, that's definitely what life's all about, though, what you just explained.
Yeah, that
Right?
was
Just letting go. That's people's biggest problem, is just letting it go.
It's true. Yeah, exactly right. 100%. Easier said than done, that's for sure.
Yes.
let go and fall down the iris. All right, so you want us to move on to the next one?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, and then we'll wrap it up with this one. This will be the third card. Here we go. Again, sorry, like that other card, I couldn't really see the writing too well, and I'm sure it was the quality. So hopefully this one's okay. Here we go.
Well, right off the bat, I'm noticing something. I'm going to let Mario go ahead, though. I know he's going to talk about this.
All right, there you go.
Whatever are you referring to? Yeah, so this is obviously the Devil card from the Thoth deck. The alternative name for this card is Lord of the Gates of Matter, right? And the Devil card, it really corresponds with, I think, it's like I see both the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. And that's how things tend to be. So if there's something that you think is completely a low vibration, there's probably a correspondence with this other ascended sort of element. And I would say that it is kind of encapsulated with this card and with just the concept of the devil and its correspondence with Capricorn. And I think Capricorn is kind of like the perfect thing to unpack to kind of explore the symbolism of the devil. So Capricorn is the sea goat, right? If you think of the glyph or you see the glyph right here, it's very, very small in the lower right hand portion of the card. But there is one portion that looks like a V, and then the other half kind of looks serpentine in nature. And so I've done a video just breaking down the glyph and the variations of the Capricorn glyph. And so that V relates to the goat nature of Capricorn, right? And so they say that the V is either the hoof of the goat or it's the beard of the goat, or that it simply just draws your eye downward because Capricorn is an earth sign. So there's lots of earth symbolism going on here, especially in the Rider-Waite version. There's so many things in the Rider-Waite version that draw your eye downward. And this is all by design. It kind of creates little arrows, forcing your eye towards the bottom of the canvas. And you kind of see it here a little bit with the horns of this goat, which is a Himalayan mountain goat, which is why it has those crazy horns and everything else. So the first portion of Capricorn, of the Capricorn glyph, is goat-like, draws your eye downward. Let's not forget that the symbol for Earth, the triangular symbol for Earth, is a downward pointing triangle with that line through it. The second portion of the Capricorn glyph is its oceanic, watery nature. And so it's more flowy, it's more feminine, it loops over itself, right? And so you can kind of see the watery symbolism coming through with the second portion of that glyph. So together, it really does represent the sea goat. So when you see an illustrated version of Capricorn, its upper half is goat-like, and it'll have its front legs, and it has its horns, and then its back half is more like a fish, right? And oftentimes its tail loops over itself, which is actually a really important, distinct sort of detail with Capricorn symbolism. And so it's the convergence of the goat, which in and of itself, the goat is known as being very, very much of the flesh, lusty, brutish. He's very much a trickster sort of thing. He likes to cause havoc and mayhem and everything else. They'll get into everything. They know how to escape. They just cause trouble. You know, they're troublemakers. God bless them, you know. And so they very much relate to the earth that way. And they relate to Pan and, you know, a lot of other like nature deities and things like that. They're also hooved animals and have this gift of climbing as well. So they're amazing, excellent climbers, just like the ram, right? And there's a relationship between the goat of Capricorn and the ram of Aries. So I would say the goat would be considered like almost like the left-hand path, and then the ram would be like the right-hand path, if you want to put it that way. But the goat, even though it has this sort of like lower nature, it knows how to climb. You know, it can climb to the highest heights. And I'm sure you guys have all seen probably nature videos of these goats climbing like impossible mountains, pretty much, you know, that we can't get
balance on dental floors.
Pretty much, dude. Yeah, exactly. And so my understanding is, I believe he chose the Himalayan mountain goat because of their climbing prowess as well. It might be better than some of the other goats. I don't know. So you have this goat that can ascend, but then you also have its the sea part of the sea goat, the watery part of the sea goat. And so therefore, it's also implied that it can dive really far down and it can swim into the depths of the ocean and of the rivers and everything else. So here, just within the sea goat, just within Capricorn, you have this ascension and descension as well. And I think kind of the devil card in a lot of ways encapsulates this idea, because if you don't acknowledge your own devil, your own demons, you're not going to get to a better place. In fact, you're going to succumb, I think, to a lot of those sort of desires and everything else. If you let it go unchecked, it will completely take over. So I think you're better off acknowledging the carnal aspect of self, the fleshy aspect of self, acknowledging your lower nature, instead of trying to pretend like it doesn't exist, instead of trying to sweep it under the rug. I think if you sweep it under the rug and you pretend it doesn't exist, it's out of sight, out of mind. I'm just a good person. I can do no wrong, blah, blah, blah. I think you're setting yourself up for disaster, essentially. So that's kind of the meaning behind the card, in so many different ways. Obviously, you can see it looks like there's two testicles in the lower portion of the canvas, and it looks like a penis is going through the rings of Saturn, which I think is really interesting too. Capricorn corresponds with Saturn. In the left testicle, it looks like there's 4 women. In the right testicle, it looks like there's 4 men. And actually, if you want to zoom into it, I don't know if you guys have ever noticed this, but the character, the figure that's in the middle towards the top on the right testicle, is actually a depiction of Pan. And when you really look at it, you can see that he has little goat hooves, and you see that he has little horns, and he has a little goatee and everything else. Right? So you see that figure?
It's definitely not human.
No.
Like that chick on the airplane.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's Pan right there, which again corresponds with this card in so many different ways. And so the goat also has a third eye, and the Hebrew letter that associates with this card is Ayin, which means eye. And actually, there's a star in Taurus that is named Ayin and is literally the eye of the bull. There's 2 stars that represent eyes, Aldebaran or Aldebaran, and then Ayin. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing as well. And I have more to say with the Rider-Waite version, but I'm going to quickly go over my notes and just make sure that I have kind of everything that I wanted to put out there. Yeah, I think that's probably pretty good, but just notice too, we're dealing with the penis. So we're dealing with the pole, phallic symbolism, and then you also have that black pole with the winged sun disk on top of it. So you will see that this card really relates to the phallus. It relates to everything that comes with that as well, including, in my opinion, the world axis. And you will see that in the Rider-Waite version, the devil is actually holding a torch, which is a phallic symbol. And he's also standing on kind of what looks like to me like a 2001 A Space Odyssey obelisk, which I think arguably is also kind of like a phallic world axis symbol as well. So when you're dealing with the pole, you're also dealing with your spine. You're dealing with, I think your structure, your foundation, your security, your backbone sort of thing.
So like for me, one thing with this card that I just want to say, so I immediately noticed like the background. So to me, it looks like bat wings that are damaged. So like, it's like he can't fly or ascend is because, he's damaged. His wings are damaged. So to me, that looks like a set of wings in the background that he can't no longer use. And then the spheres at the bottom. So that also kind of looks like the inner eye and then like the retina on each side. So, you have like the veins in the back of the eye. So that those 2 things also remind me of that as well, because it looks really similar to, the biology of the eye itself.
Interesting. Yeah. I could see that.
Nice. Yeah, some of the stuff with this card and the things that you were saying before, it just seemed like, talking about mountain climbing and even the goats. This card, if I do remember correctly, also connects Mercury or Hod on the Tree of Life to Tifereth. Again, the sun. And I was talking about before even the switch of current with this pink salmon and this, Tifereth. This is the card that connects both. And you're saying like mountain climbing. I mean, technically, even if you're looking at the tree, you are going up. You're going from that sphere to the next. You are going on a slope going up. So I mean, are you technically climbing up the tree? I mean, so I could see how where that card falls, that is all magicians are working to be at Tiferet. So I could see this card showing even the climbing up to it or the falling back down.
Mm-hmm.
You know, back down to maybe your lower self, where you're a little bit more of a trickster, or whatever. All those things that were associated with, maybe like Loki that would go with Mercury, or aspects of Thoth that would, have that stuff. But even again, the rising, I could see, going up the rising to Tefereth again, even with phallic energy. I could see why maybe we're seeing that here.
Yeah, dude, exactly right, 100%. And so, what goes up must come down. As I was saying, a lot of phallic symbolism that I personally see, I very much relate it to the world axis, which is essentially a bridge to the other side, or a stairway to heaven, or a ladder. And so, yes, there's this implied upward movement, but also you can't deny that it's a two-way street sort of thing. So you can come down the exact same way. And so also I'll just say too, it's kind of interesting that we're dealing with Capricorn, the sea goat. The last three signs, by the way, of astrology, I've talked about this before, they skew towards water. And I would say that the astrological signs in general skew towards water. So you have Capricorn, the first sign of winter, the sea goat, and so it's an earth sign, but there's this watery symbolism. And then you have Aquarius, which is the water bearer. It's an air sign, but it also correlates with water, and it's in fact providing water for the signs around it and the constellations around it. That's like part of the symbolism. There's even a lot of stuff relating the flood to Aquarius. And then you have Pisces, which is actually a water sign, and it's the fish, right? So Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, you have three signs in a row. Not all of them are technically water signs, but there's heavy water symbolism associated with all of them. And then when I'm just looking at this card and I'm thinking about that, the testicles, what's created in the testicles? Sperm or semen, right? Semen sort of thing. So that's something that's kind of going on here that I just feel like I would point out.
And a good thing, I'm glad you mentioned that, because then it just made me think of something about Pan as well. I mean, Crowley would associate him to like the Kether and Malkuth. So I guess you could see how the seed of the earth or being fully born into this. Maybe he fits. And real quick, I just want to mention again, and then you can go, Megan, and we'll go on to the next card. Again with the, I guess, the whole thing that you would normally see Hermes carrying or whatever, the caduceus or this symbol here. I do think, it's just my opinion, taking going from sphere 8, which is where, Mercury or Hode would be. I do think going there and then this path and then Tifereth, which is the 6th sphere, and the next path, which is the Hermit card, going up to Chesed. I do think that is all like the hero's journey. I do think that is actually seeing Tahuti, Thoth, Hermes, flying or going up the tree on their path, right? So I do think, from my opinion, just because of me seeing it that way, that symbol being on this card, I think is still showing you 4 is now rising and going to 6, which then goes to 4. And then if you want to take it, then you could go from 4 to 2 and then to Kether. You will get almost a Sith shape if you're holding the pole and it goes up like that. So I could see all of that, almost being representative, maybe.
Nice.
Yeah. And you can go, Megan.
I'm done with this one.
Okay, so then we'll go on to your card. Yep. Awesome.
Okay. So this card, the secret name is the Lord of the Gates of Matter and the Child of Forces of Time. So that's the secret name for that one. So this one's about misdirection, stunted growth, hard lessons, wake-up calls, temptation, enslaved to reality, indulgent, being overly indulgent or gluttonous. This card represents the 5th stage of alchemy, which is the fermentation stage. It's the final death of the old and the rebirth of the new. This also deals with deeply rooted attachments that hold us back from our true self. This card also, if you've ever heard of the term, everyone has dark night of the soul. So
Yes.
this card represents the dark night of the soul. Um, this card starts the last 7 steps towards a process of enlightenment on the wheel of the 231 gates. So this card represents your own shadow self and fears and attachment to self-loathing. It holds us captive. So it's the 15th card. 1 plus 5 is 6. 6 represents self-consciousness. This is also a lot related to the Lover's card as well. There's a lot of correspondences there as well. And so this card is about like freeing yourself from bondage. The bat wings represent the dark night, the goat head, Capricorn. We talked a lot about that. So the feet are eagle's claws, which represents Scorpio, which is associated with the sex organs, sexual energy to control and enslave others. And the talons represent clinging to the material realm. The right hand is up, and it's a contradiction of the Hierophant's blessing hand gesture. So in the Hierophant card, you have the one, and then this one is the opposing gesture for that. So in his left hand, he's got a burning torch, which is, we talked about it being a phallic symbol for life force. So there's 2 people there in the card, and they're being drained of their spiritual power. They are they're like the product of their own shadow side. They represent a human construct. So each person there represents a state of consciousness, and we need to kind of merge them together. And then you also have the inverted pentagram, which is the reversal of understanding our place in the cosmos. So if it was upright, we'd be upward. So it's turned this way. So we're focusing down to the lower levels. It's a disregard for spiritual laws and ethics. He's also sitting on a pedestal, which is a half cube. And so that represents half knowledge. So not full knowledge, but like half of the whole of knowledge. So it's not complete. His knowledge is not complete. And the 2 people are tied to this, and their knowledge of a whole is not completed yet. So that's why they're enslaved in this way. It also represents illusions and being and knowing that your enslavement is voluntary, and that it's just hidden from you, and that you can find that freedom. So this card is like a call to find that spiritual freedom and unfoldment of the enslavement of the material realm that you're in. This card also represents overindulgence, addiction, obsession, unchecked anxiety. So anytime this pops up in a reading for one of my clients, I'm like, okay, what do you have going on where you're doing one of these things? So that's what basically this card is for me.
You hit on some really, really important points. So thank you for your list, and there were some excellent keywords there. For sure, the shadow, just keep things unchecked, and hidden elements and whatever within your life. And one of the things that people have said is that if you notice the chains, right, they look loose enough for them to escape, and so they're there voluntarily, which I think is really interesting. And you're right on with the relationship to the Lover's card. This can be studied with the Lover's card, I think, and you'll get a lot out of it. What I was saying earlier regarding the lower nature and how everything draws your eye downward, you've got the inverted pentagram, which obviously has its point going towards the earth. And then you have his hand gesture, which has the kind of like this V-like shape to it that's drawing down as well. And then you have his legs, which creates a V as well, furthering your eye downward. And so this is all completely by design. Even the shape of his head, look how triangular his head is, right? With its ears and then its goatee and everything else. Everything is implying earth and bringing your eye towards the earth, which makes a ton of sense. I mean, the devil generally is associated with living underground. What I was saying earlier is I think a lot of older adversaries, devils, if you will, around the world were looked at as being underwater, not necessarily underground. So I think that Capricorn being a sea goat and corresponding with this card, I think is kind of a remnant of this entire sort of idea. And then let's see here. I think that might be it actually with the devil card on my end. You said a lot of great things there, but yeah, I think maybe that's it for me.
For sure. Yeah, I
Yep.
would even. The only thing I really have to say, because I think you really nailed it with this, everything you said. Going back to what Mario had even said before, sometimes the hardest thing is letting go, and maybe that's these chains aren't on there like tight. You take them off, let them go, and then you can start maybe heading up the trains.
Yeah, that's
It-
something like everybody needs to know just in general, man. Any spiritual path that you're on, like exactly what Nick said. You know?
Right. Yeah, no, I think it's really well put. You mentioned the dark night of the soul, and it's like all of these things are in an effort. You feel like shit, or you're going through this whole entire journey. There are silver linings to that. There's a very, very good reason why, and so you will be better off correcting maybe your mistakes or acknowledging your role in the situation or whatever, acknowledging your decisions and stuff. And so I look at all of these types of things, any hurdle or conflict in life. First off, I acknowledge my role in it, and then I acknowledge that there's a lesson to be learned here, and that's what the devil's all about. He's going to teach you all those lessons, and that's what Saturn really is all about too. And so I think a lot of lessons here in this domain, in this reality, are very Saturnian in nature. And the way I tend to look at that is, generally, I think a lot of people's problems here, you're either getting too close to something that maybe you should be distanced from, or you're distancing yourself from something that you should be actually closer to. So if you put your finger in a fire as a kid, you're going to learn a very valuable lesson. And I would say that that's a Saturnian lesson. Hey, you know what? Not all things are meant to go together like that. You're not, putting your limb in the fire. That's going to hurt, right? That's going to create issues. And so a lot of lessons have to do with boundaries. And that's what Saturn's all about too. Boundaries, restrictions, partitions, walls, things like that. And so I think that's absolutely, all of those concepts are at play here.
Yep.
Yeah. The only other thing I would add, and just trying to get back again, even I did want to mention Lisa, who did the eyeball series with us. She did mention earlier that the fleur de lis is the shape that goes with the aqueous humor. That was what I was trying to explain. And just real quick, with me talking about letting go again, or even like I think you might have even said like taking a jump, or there was something you said again that made me think like this really could be showing you diving into your pupil. I know, as crazy as that sounds, and I think it's almost like I'm trying to think of it. I think the way people think of like inner earth, or like how like it's the idea of like if you were to walk around the ledge, you really wouldn't fall over. You would just you would just turn up on your feet on the other end. It's something like that, to where I think in the symbolism, it's as if you fell down and then end up coming up and falling into the opposite side. So I do think like sometimes even this part, the night of the dark soul, sometimes I do think is that you took that plunge. And if you make it and destroy all the demons that you're so scared of that are in the dark, maybe you'll come out the other side a better person. I don't know.
Exactly.
A different person, reborn.
Yep.
And just, again, you almost have the fleur de lis with his horns, but not fully. I just do think that sometimes I wonder if the devil card is, taking off those chains and taking that plunge also to your eye, in a sense.
Yes.
Right. The other thing I'll say, just it kind of reminds me of the weighing of the souls ritual in ancient Egypt, right? Your heart being weighed against a feather, the feather of Ma'at, the feather of truth, right? And so it's the heavier your heart is, the more burdened you are, the more you're going to be weighed down. And here we're talking about Earth, we're talking about Saturn. It has an association with lead and all this other stuff. So you're the more dense you are, that's not great when you're thinking of transitioning in an ascended sort of way, so if you're going to make that transition and you're going to go to the other side, you want to be light. And as a traveler, like the Fool, you actually want to travel lightly. Look at what he's carrying with him. He has a little sack, and that's pretty much it. But there's something to be said about that, is that you do want to travel lightly here. So the more cords you have here, the more you regret, the more pain, as you're not able to let things go. There is this heaviness that comes with it. There is this weight. And so if you imagine your heart being weighed against this feather, then obviously it's going to just be lopsided. So it's interesting too, because one of the things that allows us to live lightly is humor and merriment and having fun and joking around and this and that. Dude, the devil's all about that. Pan's all about that. This kind of energy, as dark as it is, there's also a lightness that's kind of available when you can laugh at the difficult things, when you can laugh at yourself and whatever. So there's actually this humor sort of component with a lot of deities that are associated with Capricorn and Earth that way. So just thought I would put that out there.
Yeah, that's great.
You're talking about the darkness and being light as a feather and like laughing. It's like that's how I look at space and NASA videos and Elon Musk and gravity. Because you're just saying the same thing. You lose your weight when you're out into that darkness. Now you're just floating around like a feather. I mean, is it all like symbolism for what you were just saying right here?
Right.
Yep.
Or
darkness into the space,
how seriously are you taking the news and all of these different headlines?
Exactly.
And pop culture. Can you laugh at it and you're like, oh my God, that's ridiculous. I can't believe they're doing that now. Or are you getting all riled up and you're calling your friend and you're angry and don't get riled up. Yeah. So
don't get riled up.
So it's almost, there's a part of this where, that reminds me of how seriously are you taking this life? Are you taking it too seriously? Is there room to be a little more flexible and kind of see the humor in things? So I think that's definitely part of it.
A balanced jokes there helps.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you both very much. I think we're going to wrap it up there. That was already an hour and 40 minutes. Again, you want to, Megan, you go first. You want to plug your all your stuff that you got?
Yep. So I do intuitive tarot readings. My Instagram is 7 Degrees of Wisdom. You can find the links below, and also a Facebook page, Megan Allen, 7 Degrees of Wisdom on Facebook. I do all kinds of consultations. I teach a bunch of occult type classes. I've got a bunch of irons in the fire right now. I got some stuff that's going to be coming up pretty soon, so stay tuned for that. And then we're just going to keep working with Nick and Mario on this. So, but I've got my own stuff waiting in the wings here that's going to come out pretty soon. So I just kind of wanted to let you guys know about that too. But if you want to book any of my services, just DM me on Instagram or Facebook, and we'll get you scheduled.
Awesome. Yes, and I'll definitely be seeing her on my show as well, doing more stuff. And check out her links; they're all on the bottom, and you can go, Mario.
Very cool. Yeah, thanks again for having me. I get a lot out of this. It's a good time. I learn stuff, and it's good to. I feel like if you're learning the tarot the right way, I think almost every time you visit the cards, you see new things and you're going to have new insights or whatever. So if you're continuing to grow, and that's kind of what I mean, I guess, as you're continuing to grow and do research and whatever, visiting these cards and kind of looking at them again, even if you haven't seen them in a little while, it really helps. And I think for me, this is just kind of a good exercise because I was not thinking about the devil card. I wasn't necessarily thinking about temperance. But, when I spend a few minutes, leading up to this conversation and stuff, I get a lot out of it. So thank you for just kind of putting this together and everything else.
Totally agree.
But if people want to reach out, they can find all of my links and contact information at symbolicstudies.com. I, too, am available for tarot readings and study sessions. I have download packets available. I actually have a new store on my website. There's a few items in there. And otherwise, I would say for people to check out my YouTube channel and go under the live tab. I have some presentations there. And I think that a lot of stuff under the live tab kind of goes under people's radar. But I have hours and hours of presentations, so check that out. And I'm looking forward to the next one, dude.
Awesome. Thank you both very much. And I will say I totally agree. with Mario said, I mean, even if you think of it in your own life, if you're growing in height, your view is going to change regardless. So, if you're growing magically or spiritually, I'm sure your views on things will change every time you take a different look at it.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, exactly.
Very well said. That is the end of another Occult Rejects. Again, I had a ball with both of you. I always learn something from you and from the people in chat when we do this. And thank you, everybody who jumped in on the chat and everybody who was commenting. That's what's up. That's why I enjoy doing this. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.